Hello, Bill.
Welcome back, Matt.
Good to be here, everybody. Thanks. How did it go in my absence? I heard you guys had a lot of Kasich talk, which is always
Yes,
which is
yes.
always super
I mean,
compelling.
you are always missed terribly, Matt. I mean, I don't know how I make it through the week when you have to gallivant on your book tour.
I haven't read the
But
comments yet. I haven't read the comments, but I'm sure there's a lot of lamentations that I'm not.
all the commenters are like, "Oh, not Alexis again! Oh, she's so terrible. When's Matt coming back?" It's all like that.
I ask. I know that you guys are huge fans of me and what I do here. I do ask that you be respectful and polite to guests who fill in. We can't expect them. They're not gonna. Let's just be honest. They're not gonna. Even the best are not gonna be able to rise to the level that you're used to here in terms of broadcast excellence and professionalism. I do ask that you're courteous though in the comments.
But Alexis Levinson from the National Review was on, and she is following the Michael Lewis strategy of presidential campaign coverage. Michael Lewis, who wrote Trail Fever, then Rechristened Losers in the paperback version. He never wanted to follow the front-runner candidates. He always wanted to follow the also-rans. He thought that'd be more fun and interesting, and so she was on the Jeb trail before, and now she's on the John Kasich trail now. So we went very deep into Kasich and try to divine, what's this guy thinking. So if you haven't had a chance to listen, Matt, you should catch up.
I have not had a chance to listen. I do listen though to the show and to other blogging hit shows, by the way.
You were on a West Coast jag of your book tour.
Yeah,
how did that go?
It went well. It was when I was in Utah. I got snowed on. Spoke at two different colleges there, and then I went and had a lunch event in Vegas where Danny Tarkanian and his lovely wife were among the dignitaries who came out to hear me talk about Too Dumb to Fail, and ended the tour with a dinner in Phoenix, Arizona, which was quite nice. So
now Utah was a deeply anti-Trump state.
Yeah, I was actually there on caucus on caucus day, actually.
But now Nevada was a massively pro-Trump state.
Yeah, and you know what? I could even tell the difference. It's totally anecdotally, right? But just even at my my stops, I don't think I encountered a single Trump supporter in Utah, and I certainly encountered them, even people who came out to my book events. A third of the people maybe were Trump supporters. I have a couple new interesting sort of maxims, I think, that I want to inject here. I think one, this is a self-selecting thing, but if you are a minority, an ethnic minority who comes to a Republican event, I would say the odds are very good that you are a Trump supporter. Now, again, this is a specific and self-selecting group of people because, as you can imagine, most people who come to conservative and Republican events tend to be white. But that's something that I've observed. And the other thing is, I'm not the first to bring this up, but I really think small business owners are really disproportionately Trump supporters. I've kind of picked up on that on my little book tour as well.
Now, on the first one, I mean, if you are a loud and proud, non-white conservative movement member, you're already pretty idiosyncratic.
Right.
So Trump is the idiosyncratic choice for a Republican Party standard bearer. So there could be. So you're already willing to buck convention and be the only person representing your demographic in the room. So that might be a reason why you see that marriage. On the right, obviously, polls show that those non-white Trump supporters are extremely low in number.
Yeah, but the ones, right? But the only African American or Hispanic person that will show up at a given Republican Lincoln Day dinner, I'd say at least 50-50 that they're hardcore Trump supporter. And it's just based on me going this book tour. It's a very anecdotal, small sample of me going and doing this sort of book tour, but that's kind of been my experience so far.
Now your other point, your small business point. Now, I live in Massachusetts, which to this day is the strongest Trump state so far in the Republican contest. He just missed 50% here. He won my town of Northampton, although not with a lot of votes, but nevertheless he did. And I was talking to a friend who's a doctor, and he said, and he's not a Trump supporter, but he said he knows fellow Massachusetts doctors who are Trump supporters, and some of those folks will say things like, "Oh, he's not really going to build a wall." And I feel like anecdotally, so my interactions on Twitter with Trump supporters and whatnot, you get to a point where somebody indicates something that they don't think Trump really means.
Right.
And for other people, it might not be the wall; it might be something else that he's saying. You gotta say different things if you're gonna win elections. He's tell it like it is. He's the anti-politician who's gonna blow everything up. But when he does something that seems ridiculous, if you've already bought into the cult of personality, you rationalize it and you self-select what's the straight talk and what's the stuff that anyone has to say to win. And my sense is, I don't know if you get this from the small business people you talk to, if they are of the category of, he's not going to build a wall, he's not really going to ban Muslims, that's just talk. But I'm so mad at all these numbnuts in Washington. At least he's going to be something different.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the many disturbing things that I see. I agree. He's not really going to invade Poland. I just feel like, look, maybe he will, maybe he won't, but we should just take them at their word. Like, I think you should always, sort of overestimate. It's safer to overestimate your adversaries. And likewise, I think you have to at least assume that politicians might do what they say they're going to do. Like, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but you shouldn't, it's just a really bad idea to be like, he doesn't really mean that. That seems like a very dangerous, assumption to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's not going to do what he says he's going to do.
Now, I know you wanted me to start talking about this piece I just wrote about Al Franken for VP, but we're on Trump, so let's just stay with Trump for a little bit. So yesterday, sort of flummoxing to me that the thing that might be the most controversial thing he has said is expressing his anti-abortion views. You'd think in a Republican primary that's one of the safer things that he has done so far. But he was doing an MSNBC town hall with Chris Matthews. Matthews was really pressing him on if he would punish a woman criminally for having an abortion. And after, Trump kind of hems and haws and tries to avoid the question, because he's such a straight-talking politician, he finally says, yeah, sure, there'd be some punishment, but I don't know what the punishment's going to be. That has to be worked out. And that immediately not only gets attacked from the pro-choice left, but he's also being attacked by the pro-life right. Now, I have my own theory about this, but you're fervently anti-abortion. You know all the pro-life leaders in D.C. Can you explain why they were so quick to malign Trump for expressing that sentiment?
Yeah. Well, first let me say I agree with you about Chris Matthews. I think that the only way that you can interview Trump, because Trump will go on these jags and on these rants and filibuster, and he actually has his own talking points that he'll go to if he does, to sort of avoid answering specific questions. And Chris Matthews, because the show is called Hardball, even though this wasn't technically Hardball, I mean, Chris Matthews also just has the gravitas, the experience to interrupt, and the willingness to interrupt. So I think that that Chris Matthews,
Trump can outbluster a lot of people, but it's hard to outbluster Chris Matthews.
Yeah, and they're both kind of similar in a way. I mean, they're both they're both very similar. I guess Chris Matthews is from what, like Pennsylvania or something, or Delaware, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or Boston. Is he Boston? Anyway, he's got this sort of the Northeastern. He's been around politics forever. He's interviewed presidents and worked for Tip O'Neill, worked for Jimmy Carter, and he's physically imposing. I mean, Chris Matthews is huge. I used to think he was short and fat on TV, but the guy's like 6'7" or something. So anyway, for a variety of reasons, I think Matthews was able to go toe to toe with Trump in a way that not all journalists can. And he has no concerns about being polite. He's more than happy to interrupt. And so anyway, I think he really pushed and pressed. And the other thing too is that Chris Matthews, being from a Catholic background, understands the issue pretty thoroughly. And long story short, it was a very bad interview, I think, for Trump. And I think Trump's gaffes are starting to finally, we're seeing some accumulation and some starting to actually take a toll. So why did it matter? My take is I think that Trump, number one, was probably felt like he had to pander to the pro-life community. I think Matthews pushed him to the point where he had to make a choice, and he decided he couldn't be anything but pro-life, and so I think that's why he gave this bad answer. It was like Mitt Romney talking about the 47%. I don't think that's really who Romney is, but I think he sort of was pandering to these Republican donors. And I think similarly, Donald Trump sort of was pushed, and he thought this is what pro-lifers would want to hear. It turns out, I think that the mistake is, and Donald Trump is very smart and very quick-witted, but he just doesn't have the thorough understanding of the pro-life movement and why pro-lifers have very carefully put together a very specific policy, and part of it is to avoid, is to make defending the unborn life as politically pragmatic and as defensible as possible, especially and to avoid allowing liberals and pro-choicers to demagogue the issue and play the war on women card against us. And I think the problem is that Trump has now opened up the floodgates. Hillary Clinton already exploiting it. Last night she called in, which I think is a sign of her being aggressive, that she phoned in to Anderson Cooper on CNN, and on at least two different occasions tried to make the case that this isn't just Donald Trump, that what he's saying represents all pro-lifers. So this is an example of how Donald Trump is dangerous and damaging to the conservative cause in general, whether or not he's the nominee.
So basically, I mean, my sense of it is that Trump was previously pro-choice. Even today, he's had this sort of awkward message about Planned Parenthood, where he says Planned Parenthood does lots of good things. They just have to stop the abortion. Which is sort of trying to have it both ways, but not really successfully.
And by the way,
sort of making everybody angry.
This is a really interesting. The last two times I've been on CNN, I've been up against different women who are pro-Trump, and both of them have unprovoked brought up Trump's support of Planned Parenthood as an example of how he's going to appeal to women in a way that Republicans and conservatives have traditionally not been able to. So,
which is crazy, because he still wants them to stop performing abortions, which is kind of why a lot of pro-choice women support Planned Parenthood. I don't think it's a coincidence that they both unprovoked brought up this weird talking point. I'm sure they believe this makes him more appealing in a general. It's just ridiculous. It's not a coherent argument.
Let me just put just to sort of wrap this up. So, because some of the people might be wondering out there, I wrote about this at the Daily Caller. But basically, you could certainly argue that if you believe abortion is murder, that it's inconsistent and incoherent not to penalize the woman having the abortion. And likewise, you could argue that exceptions, that if you believe that you have to defend the unborn child who did nothing wrong, that having exceptions for in the case of rape and incest would be inconsistent with the belief that this is an unborn child, not a fetus, and that abortion is murder. But of course, politics is messy, and the pro-life movement, having the experience of decades since Roe versus Wade in 1973, has very assiduously tried to put together a strategy and a message that can hopefully eventually win and save the most unborn lives. And by and large, that includes, politics is messy and coalitions are messy and compromise is messy. But, the theory is you can save the most lives and potentially pass pro-life legislation by having things that may seem inconsistent, like exceptions, like the notion that you would only go after the abortion doctor, and instead you should view the woman procuring the abortion as a victim as well. So this is this messy understanding has been essentially agreed upon by pro-lifers. And what I'm saying right now doesn't really get talked about openly that much, which is probably why Donald Trump doesn't know about it. But what Trump did was basically upset the apple cart and provide Hillary Clinton and others with the ability to claim that Republicans, to basically scaremonger the issue and demagogue the issue. And it's something that pro-lifers have worked really hard over the years to avoid. And in one fell swoop, he opens the door to it.
But do you think that part of it is that the pro-life community already distrusts Trump, doesn't see him as Eric Erickson, his Never Trump statement specifically referenced his past pro-choice positions as saying this is an opportunist, he's not really a believer in the cause, and I can never vote for somebody who I couldn't trust on abortion. So if they already mistrust him, now you have a guy that you're already treating as an interloper at best, now in one fell swoop becoming the face of your movement and delivering the most politically ham-handed argument for your position, and you are stuck being attached to the hip to this guy. So they seem like they immediately want to do everything they possibly could to put some distance between themselves and Trump and say, look, this guy does not represent us, which makes him, and when you're getting hit from both sides, that gives a much bigger sense of crisis and scandal than if he was only getting attacked from the left.
Yeah, when it comes to Trump's ability to testify on behalf of the pro-life cause, he should be treated as a hostile witness at best. And I think that any distance that conservatives can put between us and Trump is good, because you don't want him to tarnish the whole, to redefine and tarnish what it means to be a conservative. And already I see it among his supporters. They, it wasn't that long ago that being pro-life was the litmus test that made you a conservative and a hardcore conservative. And now that it's seen as this touchy-feely, compassionate, wimpy, weak position. And I think that is indicative of the hardening of the right and the alt-right, and the way that Trump and Trumpism is this strongman. It's much more interested in being mean to immigrants than it is in defending the unborn.
So in past Trump kerfuffles, we assume that he has, crossed a line, violated done a cardinal sin in terms of the conservative perspective, and then his diehards rationalize it and defend it, and you even see it with his campaign manager being charged with battery. So they can always find a way. So are there going to be Trump supporters? Obviously there'll be some, but you think there'll be enough to say, well, why should the woman be punished? Well, of course she should be punished. It's murder for Pete's sake. How you abortion leaders, you're anti-abortion, you're part of the Republican establishment, and you're going against your principles by attacking Trump for this now.
I think that this one's a little different because, number one, we're seeing a pattern here, a pattern of Trump playing into the war on women narrative, right? So you've got him attacking Heidi Cruz. You've got him, his campaign manager being arrested for, alleged battery against Michelle Fields. You've got the Inquirer story, which is, may or may not be tied to Donald Trump, alleging, I think, pretty scurrilous charges about affairs involving Ted Cruz. And now, and this is all within the course of 72 hours or something, or something, or 100 hours. And now you've got the latest being, of course, him wanting to punish women, very vulnerable women. Now, he did walk that back for what that's worth. But I think that we've got a pattern, and I think that you can now argue that Donald Trump is going to be a very vulnerable Republican nominee against Hillary Clinton, that he could be a Todd Aiken susceptible to the war on women charge. And the other thing, frankly, I just think is that Wisconsin is culturally not a good state for Trump for a variety of reasons. So I think he's going to lose Wisconsin. He probably would have lost it even without this really bad media week. But I think when he loses Wisconsin, it'll feed a narrative that his gaffes have finally caught up with him. That could potentially become a self-fulfilling prophecy and lead to other
But the problem
losses.
is that the next state after Wisconsin is New York, his home state.
How long do we? Is that a week? Is that a week later, Bill? How long?
It's more than a week. It's 10 days.
Okay, so that still means that you could have several days of several more bad news days, and
so not 10 days. It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So my mistake. I'm mixing up a couple days. The Wisconsin's April 5th and New York's April 19th. So you got a big lag time, so that kind of cuts against real momentum happening one way or the other. It's his home state. He's done his best in Northeast states, so there's a lot of reasons to think that Wisconsin wouldn't be a death blow to his candidacy. However, he's kind of on the edge of being able to win an outright majority of delegates on the first ballot. So if he loses Wisconsin by a lot, Wisconsin's a winner-take-most situation. If Cruz's strength was statewide, winning every congressional district, he would win all the delegates. There's a potential to win all the Wisconsin delegates, which would make it harder for Trump to get to 1237. So my question to you is, I mean, it's almost a certainty that Trump will have the most delegates. He'll have a plurality. It might be less likely he has a majority after Wisconsin, but a plurality is practically a certainty. If there is a sense that the ceiling is starting to crack on Trump, what is the will of the Republican establishment to deny Trump the nomination at the convention if he's short of a majority? Does the campaign manager arrest? Does the punishing women for abortions? Does the Heidi Cruz attacks? Do these give Republicans the gumption to finally say, okay, you're 50 delegates short, not good enough. We're marshaling every ounce of our power to stop you on the floor of the convention?
And I think that there are a lot of people that will do whatever it takes to stop Donald Trump. And I think the most palatable way to do it, the most obvious way to do it, is for Ted Cruz to emerge from a convention fight, which I think could definitely happen. And so I think that, I mean, at this point, I think that it's not a crazy scenario that Wisconsin means Donald Trump doesn't get 1237 delegates, and then Ted Cruz emerges as the nominee from the convention. I think that's well within the realm of possibility.
All right. Well, let's shift to the Democrats because, as you may know, I'm in the midst of single-handedly making Senator Al Franken the Vice President of the United States. I had a piece in Politico on Sunday called "The Case for Vice President Al Franken," where I made that case. I don't know if you need me to go through it, line by line right here, but do read it. And since I have published that, Al Franken on at least two occasions has been asked by the media and one of those on CNN on air yesterday, on Wednesday. So that video is up at CNN.com. Where they actually quote from my piece, if I may be so humble.
That's really awesome, by the way. That's like one of the coolest things when you write something that gets injected into the news cycle, and you can help drive that discussion. That's one of the most rewarding parts of what we do, I think.
Thank you very much. They didn't quote the best line, I thought. They didn't really sum up the argument to him. So he had a line that he gave to Minneapolis Public Radio, and I was actually interviewed on that before they had talked to him, and his office gave a written statement in a first person statement that was basically, it's very flattering to be mentioned, but I'm happy in my current job serving the people of Minnesota, which is basically saying, man, I would totally take that job in a heartbeat. You know, when you say it's flattering, you know, that's not saying you're not going to take it. And so on CNN, he was on with Jake Tapper, mostly talking about his visit with the Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland. But at the end, Jake Tapper says, you know, there's this article in Politico that makes the case for you as vice president, and the quote they pulled was, "In a race that's stranger than fiction, the Democrats need Al Franken to win the presidency," and so Al Franken said, "I was going to say it was very flattering until you said it would be stranger than fiction," and then goes on to say that he'd be happy in his current job. And then Tapper properly said that's not a Sherman-esque refusal, and Franken just kind of left it there. So,
give us the quick. Give us the quick argument as to why would Franken be the right person? What's the argument for why Franken should be the running mate?
Okay. Well, this is premised on a Hillary versus Trump race.
Okay.
Which most signs point to that right now. If it's Hillary, there's going to be a lot of unhappy Bernie supporters. He has done very well. He has won 14 states so far. He could well win half of what's remaining. That would leave him with more than 20 states. He will have an ample number of delegates at the convention. They're going to make demands. They're going to want a vice president that speaks to Bernie's platform. And so Bernie himself, I think, is not an option. I think Elizabeth Warren is not an option on both sides of the fence. Hillary doesn't want to have a VP nominee that she can't trust to stay on her message. And Bernie and Elizabeth don't want to be on Hillary's message. They want to have their own message. They don't want to be under her thumb. So I don't think that's a marriage that would happen. The next obvious choice would be Sherrod Brown. Now, if you want an economic populist type, you know, Sherrod Brown he's very populist. He's endorsed Hillary. He has her trust. He's in Ohio, big swing state, but John Kasich's the governor of Ohio. So if you pick Sherrod Brown, then you're losing a Senate seat because in Ohio the governor gets to replace. And Democrats are very close to being able to take over the Senate if they can really run the table on election day. But if you give that one seat, you might give away what you have won. So that would be a big strike against Sherrod Brown. Then you go down the rest of the list. I did this in the piece. I really tried to walk through almost every possible option. And there's just no great candidate who has both, who bridge the gap between the populist and the establishment. You go through all the swing state senators, almost all of them have endorsed fast track, which greases the wheels for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, which is the enemy of Bernie supporters. Those that hadn't, you have a number of Midwestern female senators, and Hillary probably would not want to have two women on the ticket, especially when the gender gap is already enormously in her favor versus Trump. She doesn't need to bolster that with another woman. Maybe she'd do it anyway, but demographically, there's no incentive to do that. A lot of talk about Cory Booker in New Jersey. He voted against fast track, but people recall how he attacked Obama in 2012, telling him, stop attacking private equity when he was going at Mitt Romney hard for his Bain Capital record. A lot of people on the populist left remember that, think of Cory Booker as a creature of Wall Street, wouldn't be impressed with that.
So you're assuming that most important box Hillary has to check is balancing the ticket ideologically and appeasing the sort of progressive Bernie wing. But there are other...
It's how do you protect the Rust Belt from a Trump incursion? Because if he's going to run as a juice the white vote candidate, and he's not going to get much in the way of African Americans and Latinos, and he's not going to win Florida, he's not going to win Virginia, he's not going to win Colorado and Nevada, he would have to sweep the Midwest. I mean, even beyond what we know as the Rust Belt, you have to get into Wisconsin, get into Michigan, and get into Minnesota, to get into Iowa to pull that off. And then thirdly, if it is Trump, the election is a madhouse of insanity. It is just a barrage of insults. It's the sheer unpredictability of it that makes Democrats kind of nervous, even though the polls are very good for Hillary in the first place. You saw how he got into Jeb's head and into Rubio's head and turned them into puddles. So what do you do to deal with a dynamic like that? Al Franken has in 2014 won what many on the left said was the most populist campaign of that year. There was a Republican year. They picked off Udall in Colorado. They picked off a Dem seat in Iowa. But Franken, who barely won in 2008 in an Obama year, won in 2014 by 10 points, running on a very populist, the game is rigged.
He's also, I mean, comedians are tough and quick. And I mean, like he wrote a book called Rush Limbaugh's a Big Fat Idiot, right? So I mean, he's. Is there a sense that he would also be tough and smart enough and enough of a celebrity to also balance Donald Trump in that regard?
Well, that's the other part of the argument. You know, John Oliver does a Donald Trump fact check, a 20-minute fact check, which is hilarious. It got over 20 million YouTube views. That's a lot. But it probably is only reaching people who already don't like Trump. It's not getting on broadcast news. Al Franken, I mean, he has spent the last 20 years fact-checking Republicans in a humorous way. He did in his books, did it as a radio host. He even does it, as a senator from time to time. He's tried to be, not a shticky, gimmicky senator. He's tried to keep his head down, be very sober, show that he is not a goof, and that's why he's done very well in Minnesota. But from time to time, he does kind of let his wit show, and often for the case of debunking things that Republicans are saying. So he's very accustomed to playing that role, and if he's doing it in real time on the campaign trail, that's getting on the broadcast news. That's not just going on YouTube. You're going to reach people who are not diehard political junkies who still watch the CBS Evening News and still watch the NBC Nightly News. So it saves Hillary from having to get down in the gutter and deal with that stuff. Let Franken do it.
It would be interesting though if I realize that Al Franken has become a legitimate U.S. senator and did a good job of kind of toning down the comedy and becoming like a serious legislator. But it would still be sort of an admission about the celebritization of politics if you have Donald Trump running on the Republican nominee and the Democratic running mate being a Saturday Night Live alum.
I mean, Hillary is already a serious candidate. I mean, there's lots of things you can say about Hillary as far as electoral weaknesses are concerned. You can't say she's not a serious candidate. There's no one who's going to get deep into the policy weeds on the campaign trail more than Hillary is going to. So no one's going to say, I thought she was serious, but now she picked Franken, so I think she's going to be a joke. And to the extent that the knock on Franken isn't he'd be a joke, you and I know he's been a senator for 8 years. Yeah, he has done the legislative grunt work. you start quizzing him on policy, he's going to give you good policy answers. He's going to clear that bar very quickly. And by the way, you're up against Donald Trump. How are you possibly going to be accused of not taking the presidency seriously when you're up against a guy who is making, who is basically arguing that policy details don't even matter to the job? So if it's not Trump, you know, the Franken case is harder to make, although I still think he serves the function of bridging the gap between the camps of the Democratic Party. But I think all of those other knocks on Franken just don't wash when you're up against Trump.
I want to ask you some sort of inside baseball questions now. So when you write a column like this, I guess I'll do a couple of questions here. When you write a column like this, do you have a sense that this one's going to blow up versus another column? And then the other question would be, what makes it blow up? Is it because it's at Politico magazine, or is it because you get lucky and one person like Jake Tapper happens to see it? You know, the dark arts behind why some stories resonate and drive narratives and others kind of just fade away.
You know, of all the places that I write for, Politico has the biggest platform. They've built the biggest Facebook followership and the biggest Twitter followership. So they have the potential to make things go very viral. But having said that, I write plenty of things for Politico that don't go viral. It's not magic. I mean, just because they have the people that get the tweet or the Facebook post have to want to share it with others for it to actually go viral. So there's all sorts of various factors, both luck and skill, that go into that. So when I wrote this piece, and I wrote it a couple weeks before it actually got published, I felt very good about it. I definitely sense that if you can get an interesting celebrity name into the headline, people who love or hate that celebrity are going to be intrigued what you were saying about that person. So there's a bit of some cheap gimmickry there as far as getting people's attention. But I also knew that the article was going to deliver. I mean, I got a lot of feedback that was, like Franken's career, it starts off ridiculous, but by the end, it makes a lot of sense. So right. I knew it wasn't going to be a thin argument.
You had the perfect marriage of having like a sexy hook, but also having like the substance to back it up. It wasn't right. It wasn't just like a clickbait story. There was actually like a very plausible argument to be made. And I will say this, Bill, as much as we give you a hard time about some of your predictions about sort of elections, like the Jeb Bush thing, which that's not your strong suit, but this kind of thing is your strong suit. You see these possibilities before anybody else does. So this is an example.
I'm not predicting here. I'm not saying you're going to do it.
I know. But this is something that you've done this. I mean, you've had ideas like this before that I thought were really super smart and interesting. And your New York Times Sunday op-ed about liberals and big business, and this is really good column writing and good sort of like think PC stuff. So anyway,
I appreciate that. But I want to go to the point about the viral aspect of this, because so I wrote this after she won the March 15th contest, when she swept the 3 Midwest states and Florida, North Carolina, and it really seemed like the race is now turned for good. We can start talking about VP pick stuff, and people are going to want to pay attention to it. And then Bernie wins 5 of 6 of the stuff out west. Now, I still believe that means Hillary has the nomination. He can't catch up in the delegate count. But the tenor of the coverage is no longer about moving to the general. It's about how can Hillary put Bernie away. And so when Politico posted it on Sunday morning, right after Bernie wins Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, my initial reaction was, "Oh, come on! Why are you doing this now? How am I going to get traction in this piece? No one's going to care about what VP choices she's going to make at this point." So I was actually very surprised that it still went viral anyway. I mean, I got some guff from Bernie supporters saying, and
in fact, maybe it wouldn't have if it hadn't been delayed. I mean, it's possible that the story, for whatever reason, had you gotten to select the timing, it may not have been as well received.
Who knows? I mean, that's the part where I throw my hands up and say I just don't know anymore. But
yeah.
But because and usually with these pieces, I mean, you can tell in the first hour how well it's going to do. Once Politico puts it on Facebook and Twitter, it gets a good response or it doesn't. And once it gets that good response, it can really sustain. So, by 24, 48 hours later, I get a retweet from Nick Kristof saying, here's a really well-reasoned case about Al Franken as VP. Like, it might not reach a Nick Kristof unless it had that 24 hours of solid percolation ahead of time, and then it gets, once a Nick Kristof does it or a few other big names do it, then it gets to a Jake Tapper, or it gets to Jake Tapper's staff, and it gets posted to Franken directly. I mean, that's how the sausage gets made.
So anyway, you mentioned Bernie, and you got another interesting piece out about Bernie Sanders, how he could, I'll put the emphasis on could, win the nomination. Is that really, if he were willing to do what he had to do, which is to, could he actually pull this off, Bill?
Well, I mean, he would have to do, when we talk about running the table, I mean, this has been done by both NPR. NPR did this, and 538 did this. They laid out exactly what he would have to do. Both of them came to the same conclusion. There are 18 states left. Bernie would have to win 16 of 18 states to overtake Hillary in the pledged delegate count. Now, you could argue maybe he doesn't quite get 16, but let's say he got 12 of 18, and he won maybe one or two of the big states like New York or California or Pennsylvania or New Jersey. That would wound Hillary so badly that the superdelegates might actually consider flipping and bring Bernie over the finish line. I mean, that's the other scenario that's out there. But either way, he has to win a lot of what's left. And now Nate Cohn at the New York Times, he did a model just based on demographics, not polls. And he's not saying he's not arguing this is a precise prediction of what's going to happen. But based on what we've seen so far, what the demographics of the remaining states, Bernie would win 10 of the 18. 5 of those 10 would be by very small margins, so that definitely suggests that those are not in the bag. And if you win a state by a little bit, you're splitting delegates. In the NPR 538 cases, many of the states that would be won by large margins, double-digit margins, for him to get the delegates that he would need. And of the states that Bernie is more likely to win, they are the smaller states that are out there. It's not New York, it's not California, it's not Pennsylvania, it's not New Jersey. So my point in my Politico piece is, if Bernie's actually going to win, what his campaign is saying, they have told the press, we're going to introduce Hillary more aggressively to African American communities, for example. We're going to put Spike Lee and Harry Belafonte and Cornel West. We're going to put them out in New York and really drum a lot of attention. They've made some hints to the Washington Post that they're going to be rough on Hillary in New York. They're going to bring up Wall Street. They're going to bring up fracking. They're not going to let her go lightly. All of those things are tactics that would appeal to those already inclined to support Bernie. And look, there are a fair amount of them, but Bernie, and some people say, well, there's also momentum. He's won 5 of 6 of the most recent states. He could well win Wisconsin on Tuesday. That would be 6 of 7, and it's a primary state. Here's the thing: 14 of Bernie wins. 10 are caucus states, low turnout caucus states, predominantly white caucus states. There's an argument out there that, well, the last 3 states Bernie won are some of the most diverse states in the country: Alaska, Washington, and Hawaii. Yes, they are diverse largely because of Asian and the Pacific Islander community, not because of African Americans and Latinos. So there's still not a lot of evidence that he's made significant inroads into those communities. And only 4 primary states, bigger primary states, 2 of the primary states he won were Vermont and New Hampshire in his backyard. So he's very, very limited track record of winning, decent-sized primary states. Michigan being the best example of that. In Michigan, there was a particularly high youth voter turnout, or youth broadly defined, under 45. Bernie is much his strongest support is under 30. He's winning 71% of the under 30 vote. He's losing 65% of the over 30 vote. So, and he needs to do much better with older voters to win these bigger primary states, because he's not going to get the same young demographic in Michigan that you're not seeing that replicated in other states. So what it comes down to, in my mind, is he has to adjust his message to win over older voters, regardless of race, who are naturally inclined to support an establishment pragmatic candidate, who are naturally inclined to be skeptical of somebody saying, I have an ideologically pure platform and I can win the general election and enact my agenda that way. And that's just not what Bernie is accustomed to doing. Now, as I point out in the piece, he has pragmatic aspects to his record. He can point to his Veterans Administration reform. He can point to his compromises to audit the Fed. He can point to his mayoral record in Burlington. He could make that central to his case. It's not like he doesn't have cards to play. He just doesn't like to play them. He mentions it when asked, but it's not the central focus of the campaign because, in all likelihood, he is not as interested in winning as he is in building an ideological movement to change the party and change the country over the long haul. But if he wanted to win, he would need to put forth primarily not just his pragmatic domestic record, but also emphasize what he would do as commander-in-chief, something he generally downplays. Just in the past week, this big Brussels attack, Hillary immediately gives a counterterrorism address. Bernie does not. He doesn't want that to be the main focus of the campaign, but she wins on commander-in-chief exit poll questions. Who do you trust in international crisis? Exit poll questions by miles, because Bernie harping on her Iraq vote just doesn't get you there. So he needs to do things differently to win these states. He can't just do the same old, same old.
Fascinating stuff. Check out that. What's it called? It's a clip
that is how Bernie can win, but he's not going to like it. That's it. That's in Politico today.
And of course, the Al Franken piece as well. We got to get you back on the Matt Lewis podcast. We should have.
Well, I was going to mention I just started my own podcast.
I feel like everyone just started a podcast. We're having like a podcast moment, aren't we?
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel I'm sort of kicking myself because I had a podcast sort of before podcasts were cool, and we actually had a pretty good audience. But my co-host wasn't able to. She had some work obligations. She couldn't keep it going, and so I shelved it. Now I feel I'm a little bit behind the curve, but I am trying to bring it back. I rechristened it called Talk Me Down, a liberal oasis podcast for anxious liberals. So I'm trying to keep it on one subject each podcast, talking about something that's making liberals a little twitchy, and explain why they shouldn't be so twitchy.
Why are podcasts all of a sudden, like, in the last 6 months? I mean, is it that what was that Slate?
Gabfest?
No, like the mystery thing or whatever. Serial.
Oh, that's not Slate.
Well, was it Serial?
That came out. It's called Serial, but it came out of This American Life.
Oh, okay.
And now they have a relationship with Pandora, actually. But yeah, I think Serial definitely took podcasting to a new level. But that was really to showing how you could do original reporting through podcasting, and a lot of podcasting isn't that. A lot of podcasting is still, what you and I do.
But I don't understand though. Is I feel like in the last 6 months, podcasts, like political podcasts, have exploded. Like I've been podcasting for like 6 or 7 years now. I think I started maybe 6. I think I started. I mean, I started when I was at AOL's Politics Daily, and that was like in 2010 maybe. So I don't know, 6 years or something, but. But I don't know why, like in the last 6 months, it seems like it's exploded.
Well, we're in the season. We're in the campaign season, which I think just generally leads to spikes in political media in general. Yeah. I think there's a lot of head scratching going on about what's actually going on out there, and people. I think there's a certain constituency that wants to go deep into it, and a good podcast can go deep. It's not clickbait. It's not, it's not listicles. It's trying to get some people together who know what they're talking about and get under the surface. And I think people, because it's, the podcast technology is sort of easy to put together. You don't need the cost of assembling one is a lot less than what it used to be, and there's the ease of accessing it on your phone is much easier than it used to be, and so all that's coming together. I know people who are really into the 538 podcast because they turn out quick after
what
these
podcast?
Elections. The 538.
530. Oh, see, I didn't even know they had one.
Nate Silver.
Yeah, right, well, let me. Look, I recommend the Weekly Standard has a similar thing. They churn it out if there's a debate, that ends at 10. At 10:30, they'll have a podcast up with Bill Kristol or somebody weighing in on what happened. So I mean that's never been my model, but there's definitely. I mean, I as a consumer, I appreciate it.
Now, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to figure out how can I do my podcast differently than I did it before. Because before I was doing it every week, and it was just sort of, what happened in the past week, what's your take on the week, and my sense of that is, and look, I don't have a lot of free time, I don't have a lot into prep stuff. I'm just generally stretched thin. But if I'm going to do it, I want it to have a shelf life, and if I'm doing just the week in review, that kind of podcast does not have a shelf life. You do an Insta podcast after a debate or after a primary, I mean, you'll get an audience for the next 24, 48 hours, but not much after that. So My thought with Talk Me Down was I do a Talk Me Down episode about how Trump can't really win. That has legs for the next several months. It's not as time sensitive, assuming he's the nominee. It's not as time sensitive. So and I get the sense that people do podcasts kind of at their convenience. And some people, I know people who just wait for that 538 podcast to come in and they listen to it right away. But a lot of stuff is just when you can get to it. And so I'm trying to do stuff that would serve that need.
Speaking of the sort of evergreen, have you ever listened? You would like this podcast, Slate's Whistle Stop. Do you know about that?
Oh, I love Whistle Stop.
Really
I was
good.
partly inspired by that because Whistle Stop is the history of campaigns. I can dip into that whenever. It's not a time sensitive thing.
Yeah, but it can be timely, right? So, the most recent podcasts have been, he'll talk about, convention fights, 1952 or 1964 or 1976. And so, I mean, but you could go back to that 10 years from now and it would still be, it's history. It would still be worthwhile. So, yeah, I recommend that one. And so that's sort of the model you're looking at now, something that's going to be more or less evergreen.
Yeah, and I think sort of more, delving back into history, putting things into broader context, not so moored to the news cycle. That's what I'm shooting for.
Gotcha. All right, well, check that out. How can people find that? Is it on iTunes, Stitcher?
So it's on iTunes. It's on SoundCloud. It's at liberaloasis.com. It's all wherever you can find, wherever podcasts are sold, you can find it.
And check out my book, Too Dumb to Fail, and my podcast, Matt Lewis and the News, which is available at iTunes. So check that out.
All right.
And go read Bill's Politico magazine pieces, as we've talked about.
And if you haven't bought Too Dumb to Fail yet, you are clearly behind the curve. So this is the time to get it.
Go get it right here. All right. Thanks, guys. See you.
Take care.